Okay. Good evening. This is Keith, ZS6HI, commencing with these ZS6, the Power Hour Tech Talk on leaky feeders and other true stories. So good evening to all that have joined us this evening, and hope that you find this topic very interesting. I certainly have seen a little bit of insights into the topic, and I think you're going to be in for a treat this evening. So what I'd like to just do is introduce our guest speaker, Henry Root, ZS6IIX. So just a little bit of information about Henry. He was born a few years back in Germiston, and he was introduced to ham radio by a family member back in 1994. And he inherited an ICOM IC2 set handheld back a number of years ago, and he got involved with the Centurion Club, ZS6 Charlie Echo November, to get his license. In September 1996, before the exam, he wrote a mock exam and the reg exam, and he then got his call sign shortly thereafter, ZR6IIX. In 2001, he did a 12 word per minute Morse test with ZS6ALJ and ZS6AWS. And I think the rest is really history. He's a family man, so he has a few kids, and he has a shack full of equipment. So go to Henry's QRZ page if you want to learn a little bit more about Henry's equipment and what he's got in his shack. He also works for Neurospec, so I think he has a lot of professional insights into radio. He's been working on radio equipment as a technician back in 2000, and then in Tetra Mobile in 2007, and as a technician on projects from 2010 to 2014, and a project manager full-time from 2015 to 2019, and Neurospec from 2019 onwards. And I think you'll see that come through the presentation today. So I think we're very privileged to have Henry and his time. And just to let you know, I twisted Henry's arm at the last Pretoria Flea Market. And thank you very much, Henry, for rising to the occasion and providing these insights to us. I'd like to hand over to Henry, ZS6IIX, to take it away. Henry has indicated that if you don't mind holding your questions to the end, he will get to all your questions after the main presentation. But the chat facility is open, and you're most welcome to use the chat facility to make comments or ask questions en route. So over to you, Henry. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you very much, Keith. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, it made me feel humble again. The person that introduced me to amateur radio was a person by the name Giel van Niekerk, Zulu Sierra 6 Golf November. November Golf, sorry. No, nog geld. Now, I believe he was one of the first, he was one of the pioneers for EME, and one of the first to make contact with the US on 433. I visited his home, saw this big dish, and then I was hooked. All right, to start off, my first encounter with underground communications was when I was asked to install a leaky feeder system in the DRC. Never seen this stuff before, and since then I did a few installations. I did the Gautrain installation from the first blast at Marlborough Station to the handover stage. If you ever go down to use the Gautrain, go down to the lower platform, south side, and you'll see the leaky feeder cable against the wall. It's 1 5/8 thick, that specific cable. I did installations in Mali, Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Ghana, DRC, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, India, and South Africa. I got about 20 years of experience with underground radio communications. So tonight, we'll have a small, come now. This presentation tonight will be we will trace the evolution of underground mine communications from manual signaling to integrated IP, LTE, and 5G ecosystems. South Africa's deep-level mines are central to the story because the depth and geology drove unusually demanding communications innovations. Yeah, ordinary radio struggles underground. Underground mines are one of the most hostile environments for radio propagation. Conventional surface FM systems cannot supply by moved underground coverage must be designed around a mine rock, water, tunnels, and equipment conditions. Signal attenuation rises with frequency. Sharp bends and junctions interrupt the line of sight. Metal supports, arches, um, heavy equipment distorts the coverage. Motors and drive introduce electrical noise. Reliable communication therefore needs to be engineered with pathways and redundancy. The story moves from signals to ecosystems. The evolution is cumulative. Tonight I'm battling. Early signals coordinated hosting, wired systems added with voice, distributed networks, extended coverage, and modern IP networks carry operational data and automation traffic. So you'll have a signals, use bells, whistles, rope. They use candles, put their hand in front of the candle. Then they moved over to voice. Later on, leaky feeder and digital radio, fiber and Wi-Fi was introduced in between 1970 and 2020. And at present, the guys are using private LTE 5G, as well as AI and autonomous equipment. Early mines used manual signaling. It's like methods dependent on sight, hearing, and physical connection. These methods work only while working in close proximity to each other, and the crews remain close to the supervisor. The shaft bell was one of the first organized mine communication systems. So its value came from standardization. Each sequence had a defined meaning that could be acted on immediately. Most of them are still in use. So they used a bell and ring the bell to inform the person to raise the cage, lower the cage, um, uh, different levels, and indicate which level they need to stop. And then if there's an emergency, they just rang the bell continuously. While electricity became common, mines introduced copper wire telephone networks with magnetophones and manual exchanges. I had a lady on top there pulling all the cables, pushing it from one hole to another hole. So you pick up the phone, the older generation will know, pick up the phone, turn the slinger key, and on the switchboard, small indicator will fall open, and they'll know that person called on that specific one. And then they just connect the 2 or 3 different levels together. The system improved coordination, but remained vulnerable because one broken cable or inaccessible telephone could isolate an area. So what improved was faster communication, better communications, safer blasting control. Before a blast must take place, the mine must be clear. Everybody must be out underground. And there was a surface control room What failed is broken cables, frequently fall of rock, water damage, and workers still have to walk far distances to get to that specific telephone. South Africa tested radio through rock from 1938. Now, I'm going to read from the slide. The Bernard Price Institute at the University of Witwatersrand began investigating whether careful chosen radio frequencies could propagate through rock. The research path was interrupted by World War II, then resumed after the war. The key insight was low frequencies could travel through rock and along the rails in the mines and a steel piping for ventilation and water. South Africa's role, most of our mines is very, very deep. The deep gold mines created uniquely demanding test conditions. Post-war work included researchers such as Trevor Watley and the Chamber of Mines. The early experiments established that underground propagation depends on frequency and on conductors already present in the mine. What changed everything? Colebrook, 1960, exposed the cost of lost communications. 435 people lost their lives in the Colebrook colliery disaster. There was a rockfall, and the people were trapped underground. I can't remember exactly how many people did escape the mine. There was a whole story that the people were forced to go back in after the first seismic event because they were told if you don't go underground, you will be fired and arrested. So, yeah. The rescue teams entering the collapsed mine had almost no means of communications once they were underground. The disaster escalated research and investment in dependable mine rescue radios. Low frequencies can communicate through rock. VLF and LF signals penetrate rock more efficiently than conventional VHF or UHF radio. The trade-off is very low bandwidth, which limits the system's everyday operational use, but makes it valuable for emergency links. Through the earth, radios send a magnetic signal directly through surrounding strata. Typical operational frequencies used to be 3, 8, 12, and 20 kilohertz. Lower frequencies means longer wavelength and lower attenuation. A 10 kilohertz signal has a wavelength of about 30 kilometers. So large loops, ferrite and magnetic induction antennas replaced was impractical because of the full length of the antennas. It's best suited for rescue and emergency communications, but the bandwidth is limited. On the one slide, I think Keith will make the slides available. They'll see where a person is sitting with a radio and one of those loop antennas. Leaky feeder enable mine-wide radio. The problem was conventional radios could not communicate around bends and through large rock bases. The solution, a slotted coaxial cable, behaves like a distributed antenna. Portable radios will connect wirelessly to the cable, while amplified signals travel along distances along it. Now, leaky feeder remains one of the greatest breakthroughs in underground mine communications. It enables continuous mobile, voice, and data coverage along tunnels where free space radio would fail. Leaky feeder systems for mine communications as one of the headings. The RF signal from a head end, a little bit later I'll show you a head end and so on, are transmitted through the tunnel using a leaky feeder coaxial cable. Normally, coaxial cable is designed to keep as much signal as possible within the cable and block any other external signals and noise from getting in. Leaky feeder, however, is designed to leak or radiate the RF signal out, as well as allowing signals in from handheld radio transceivers within close proximity to the leaky feeder coax. To sustain the RF signal level over longitudinal distances, line amplifiers or boosters are inserted along the leaky feeder cable run, typically about 300 to 350 meters. The exact distance depends on the longitudinal losses of the radiating cable. The coverage is required in a tunnel of the main arterial, such as a ramp, a shaft, or crosscut. A splitter is installed. However, if the tunnel is less than 100 to 150 meters in length, the cable from the main drive or decline could be looped into the tunnel for about 30 to 50 meters and back out again. Now that is much cheaper. You will see why by doing that for your design and for the building of the system. Amplifiers may be required in the branch line, depending on the length, to maintain RF signal levels. At the end of each cable run, a termination unit or dummy load is required to maintain the systems. VHF, we use 75 ohm, and UHF, we use 50 ohm impedance. And avert radio reflections on the cable causing null spots. The more recent amplifiers are downline powered from 5 to 48 volts via the leaky feeder center conductor. So what we do is we inject power onto that radiating cable as well as a signal, so we can power amplifiers and active components via the leaky feeder cable. Older generation amplifiers have tighter DC supply requirements. Leaky feeder coaxial cable is available in 350 or 500 meter drums. Other lengths in the outer sheet color are available to order. The cable is also available with a non-smoke, zero halogen outer sleeve. That will prevent flame retardant. That comes down to flame retardancy. So you don't want to put smoke in the tunnel. If anybody was in a tunnel where smoke is, within a minute, the tunnel is blocked off. You can't see nothing. Radiating cable is a coaxial cable deliberately designed to leak RF energy along its length. The same opening that radiates the downlink also receives portable radio uplink signals. Now, on the slide, you'll see a normal RF cable. As outer sleeve, your inner conductor and your normal cable. And then on the radiating cable, you'll have holes in that will transmit the signal out. And if you talk with a radio, it will leak this. It will let the signal go onto the radiating cable. Slots openings is in the outer conductor, release and receive RF energy. Coverage, the cable creates a continuous radio path along the tunnel. Mobility, handheld and vehicle radios connect without a physical connection. Distances, repeaters restore signal levels along long run cables. Repeaters is actually the wrong word there. It should be amplifiers. The services, one backbone to support voice, paging, and data. The amplifier stabilizes leaky feeder coverage. Long radiating cable runs needs regular amplification because the cable attenuation, both for transmit and receive signals. A balanced design avoids excessive gain, noise, oscillation, and uneven coverage. So you'll place the amplifier in such a way that you'll have your gain and then it will deteriorate over a certain distance. Normally it's 350 meters, but we shorten that for a reason. So if you put the amplifiers too close, you over amplify the noise. And if the distance between amplifiers is too far, you'll have a signal and then you'll have a dead spot. Cable placement determines tunnel coverage. Coverage is shaped by where and how the cable is installed, not only by transmitter power. Design must account for bends, heavy equipment, tunnel cross sections, branches, damage of risk, and interaction with other mining services. Typically, installation will follow the pattern of a tunnel and access routes of the mine with a suitable arrangement of splitter units and inline amplifiers. The overall longitudinal distance that can be covered by the system is based on a combination of items as follows: noise performance of each amplifier, sensitivity of the handheld receivers, the correct modulation and deviation on all handhelds and base station equipment, avoidance in in-band interference from man-made RF noises, sources like frequency inverters, and there's one of the motor controllers also generates some noise. Installation and system extensions carried out according to strict rules. A proper head-end equipment configuration, also very necessary. If all of these issues are correctly addressed, the distance of up to 25 km per arterial can be easily accomplished. Now, what it means by arterial, on your head-end, you've got 4 outputs where you normally have antennas. Now, they put a cable in on each output, and then they'll have up to 4 arterials. So you can have a mine with 4 entrances, maybe 1 vertical shaft with 3 declines, 1 for material, 1 for conveyor, and 1 for personnel. Multiple arterials and active repeater channels underground can extend the coverage well within. Radio waves, electronic magnetic waves, are well suited for sending signals across air gaps or across the ether, as it is typically called, in the line of sight or slight curvature in its path. Mining tunnels are, of course, anything but line of sight. The only chance for conventional radio wave to transverse the length of a mining shaft is by means of reflections of the walls. Of course, the signal quickly attenuates to nothing under these conditions. Other contribution problems is called shading. Shading occurs when large grounded objects are placed in the path of the radio signal. That will be a dump truck or a loco. The object absorbs the radio signal and prevent it from reaching radio shaded areas. The most obvious solution to these problems is to have multiple. I don't know who was that, sorry for that interference. Um, the most obvious solution to this. No, I'm still on slide 13. I'm still on slide 13. So the most obvious solution to these problems is to have multiple individual antennas located along the entire length of the tunnel. Of course, this comes with a few distinct problems, such as such as how to efficiently locate them, how to interconnect them, and how to protect the producing antennas from inevitable damage. A far more elegant solution is radiating cable, or leaky feeder, as the South African mining industry has come to call it. The interconnecting cable becomes the antenna, and since it works so well, we do not even need individual antennas anymore. Various patterns are fashioned into the outer sleeve of the slightly thicker coaxial cable to allow some of the RF signals to escape longitudinally along the cable. If manufactured to accurate tolerances, this escape RF signal can be tamed to provide exactly what we are looking for. I'm just going to run quickly over the installation. We try to put the leaky feeder out of the way of big vehicles. If we have a splitter in the cable, we have to take that in consideration. Mechanical protection, you don't want to get close to ventilation pipes or other services of the mine, like firing cables, power. If you need to cross them, you have to cross them at a 90-degree angle to minimize potential interference. Okay, let's go just to the next one. Slide 13, I saw UHF. The next slide is slide 14. UHF favorably over VHF for radiating cable systems in underground environments. Actual coverage depends on cable type, installation, mine geometry, and selected equipment. Now, the coverage from a cable can reach up to 30 meters, up to twice for VHF. Less susceptible to common binding noise, improving voice and data. That's why we want to use UHF. We have a wider bandwidth of about 10 megahertz versus 2 megahertz for VHF. We have higher channel capacity on UHF, up to 50 channels, where a VHF only have 16. We can support from VHF all the way to 2.4 gigahertz. That will be for GSM, the 800, 900 megahertz frequency band, and 2.4 gigahertz LAN on one backbone, lower risk of intermodulations and crosstalk. You'll see on the left-hand side is the VHF and the UHF comparison. The bottom one was a test we did in 2009 in a coal mine. So coal mines are very, very much different than normal mining, hard rock and other mines. So they do pillar mining. Sometimes you can get up to 1 kilometer of that cable. Digital radio was added to operational data. In 1995 to 2010, communications began carrying operational info, not only speech. They introduced DMR and trunking, and DMR, the digital voice and error correction, trunking, shared channels and coordinated fleets, dispatch one control room or remote control room. They were able to do messaging, text, alarms, work updates. Surface fleets had a GPS on the DMR system. and production and equipment data was also sent. Page 16, DMR doubles capacity with 2 time slots. The frequency we use, okay, shout at me. We do use 430 to 460 megahertz. The frequencies underground does not leak out onto surface. So that's why we use 430 megahertz. DMR uses a time divisional multiple access. So a single 12.5 kilohertz channel can support 2 logical channels or conversations. Telemetry also allows equipment to report conditions, locations, and alarms through the communications network. The other telemetry is also the temperature, fuel, motor status, battery locations, faults that could happen. One big reason why they decided on DMR, because you have a longer battery life and a consistent voice quality over a further distance. With analog, you'll have a signal, a good signal, and then it will deteriorate till you get into the noise, where DMR or other digital signals will have a longer good signal with the error correction, and then it will start falling away, and then it will sound like O2D2 talking. So at that stage, you're already very, very far from that communications equipment. Now, in the bigger mines, you normally deploy Tetra, the group calling, priority access, and central dispatch are important. It is a structural operational radio system rather than a general purpose broadband network. Now, I know Motor Turbo and Arteria do have tier 3 trunking, but most of the smaller mines don't opt for tier 3 trunking. They just use normal DMR. So with Tetra, it's same as a telephone call, a WhatsApp call where you can have one person. It's easy to set up. You have group calls, emergency override, you have encryption. There's a dispatch console on surface. They do have GPS integration for surface mining, and they can do recordings. Now, as mines became deeper and more automated, fiber optics replaced copper as a high-capacity backbone. Its immunity to electrical interference is practically valuable in industrial environments with motor drives and high-voltage equipment. Now, we suggest to the people to use single mode. Single mode can give you up to 120 kilometers with the typical speeds between 10 gigahertz to 40 gigabits per second, 400 gigabits per second. So it supports voice and IP telephony, video, CCTV, SCADA, it's controls of pumps and so on, and PLCs, the production database, and a lot of wireless access point. Fiber also provides reliable long-distance transport for leaky feeder, Wi-Fi, LTE, and control systems. Wi-Fi took digital tools underground. Underground Wi-Fi brought familiar IP applications into the mine. Coverage still depends on carefully spaced access points and a resilient wired backbone. Now, everybody's got a router at home. Average distance from that router is 30 meters. We were able to get up to 80 meters from a access point. Standard 802.11 AB, G and N. AC and AX is also possible, but that would be on shorter ranges. Applications include your normal VoIP or voice over IP or radio over IP. Tablets can be used, normal cell phones, videos and asset tracking was made possible. Vehicle telemetry and maintenance systems reduce paperwork. So the data from the vehicle will be sent via the Wi-Fi network to surface, and it makes it much easier for them to book in a vehicle in for service. Real-time production data will also improve the operational awareness. Private LTE gives the mind control over spectrum, mobility, quality of service, and integration. Its architecture links the core network to a base station, a distributed antenna layer, underground devices, and control room. Now, it's nice to have a LTE, a private LTE network underground. Some mines do, 10% of the mines in the world do have LTE or 5G, but most opt now for Wi-Fi. To come back to Wi-Fi, in the early years with Wi-Fi, namely 1, 2, 3, and 4, the weakest link will prescribe the link for all devices on that network. But with Wi-Fi 5 and 6 and the new 7, each device negotiates its own data rate, and they use octagonal frequency divisional multiplexing. And that is a digital multiple carrier modulation scheme. It splits a high-speed data stream into hundreds or thousands of small blocks, parallel streams, transmitting them across a closely spaced overlapping subcarrier frequency. These subcarriers are mathematically octogonal, and meaning they cannot interfere with each other. So yeah. The trade-offs, you have to use conventional antennas in the tunnel, and they have a limited reach, and infrastructure is expensive. Now, LTE system compiled with certain components, like the EPC core, eNodeB, HSS, MM, and the one for identification, I can't remember the abbreviation for it. But for every base station or for every LTE network, they have to install eNodeBs in the tunnels and connect eNodeBs with fiber. So, yeah, it's getting expensive. I built a LTE system for the office. It's about 250,000 Rand cheaper than Nokia and the other places quoted us for eNodeB. So to roll out a private LTE, you have to have a very, very wealthy mine. Private 5G scales automation and connected devices. The newest mines are adopting private 5G to support dense device populations, low latency control, and high bandwidth for video. The figures shown are the technical characteristics and should be treated as target capabilities and not guaranteed mine-wide performance. Now, what it means, we've got a less than 10 milliseconds latency, peak bandwidth of about 10 gigabits per second, and a device density of 1 meter per square kilometer. So yeah, it's getting quite expensive. It enables autonomous trucks and driverless loaders, remote drilling and remote operations, high definition video, AI, robots, and digital twins. I'll speak about a little bit later about digital twins and predictive maintenance. That comes in with edge and digital twins. Nowadays, modern mines tracking combines the communications network with multiple positioning technologies. Remember, underground, we don't have GPS signal. Now we have to rely on certain other technologies to give us a tracking of personnel uh, and any other assets. So we are using RFID tags, Bluetooth low energy beacons, ultra wideband positioning, Wi-Fi triangulation, and LTE positioning. The why it matters, knowing where people, vehicles, and assets are, we support a safer evacuation. It supports a better evacuation in an event of an emergency. It's faster dispatch, collision awareness is higher, productivity and analytics and emergency accountability. So you can do tracking with your ultra wideband, about 30 centimeters accuracy. With Wi-Fi, you get a meter or two. Um, we get at the office on 2.4 gigs up to 26 meters, but we're working with the RSSI, and it's real time. Your assets, your personnel and equipment is real time. You can see where they are. Now, control centers convert networks into awareness. Modern control room integrates normal radio dispatch, CCTV, SCADA, that's the control of pumps and to see if a pump is running, speed control running, belt running, ventilation pumps up, your gas and seismic monitoring. Some mines is very prone for gas, methane, can't smell it, you can't see it, light the fire, and we pick you up. Sorry, we don't pick you up. You'll be splattered like the stars in the sky. I've been to methane explosion underground, and it's not a very, very nice sight to see. Personal tracking and telemetry, digital mine maps. They use GIS for mapping and fleet management and emergency management. The control center is where separate communications, monitoring, automation systems become one operational platform. The objective is real-time awareness rather than a collection of isolated systems or screens. So you have one system and you have a lot of screens in front of you, and you can see everything with one glance. Emergency systems are designed for failure. Why do I say that? If an emergency system dies, you run the risk of people dying in the tunnel. So we aim for 99.9% plus high availability. So resilient layers, what we do is we do a redundant fiber optic ring. So you have a run from clockwise from one shaft down in the mine, from one vertical shaft, or then from the declines also into the mine to your equipment. You have battery backup radio repeaters, leaky feeder backup valves. So they all also have a arterial running on two different shafts. So if one goes down, they still have communications to the other one. We have refuge bay communication terminals. Proto teams use the through earth emergency radios. And then we have automatic alerts and personnel accountability. Redundant power plus dual paths plus failover infrastructure. So, yeah, you can't just rely on one radio system. You have to have a few systems running. And the mines have at least two. They still use the bell system or a normal telephone system, what the people are calling the Bisa Kaluma, and then the radio system, or Wi-Fi, or ROIP, or VoIP, and so on. Deep South African mines drove global innovation. Now it's a little bit of history again, timelines. 1938, early propagation research was done. South African mine depths and geology created communication problems unmatched in many other unmatched in many other mining regions. The pressure led to important work in propagation research, rescue radios, large-scale deployment, and the integration of communication systems with tracking and automation. So, from the 1938's early propagation, so the research was done. The world-class deployment, extreme deep gold mines, tested reliability at uncommon scale. Single sideband were used. You will not believe it. Single sideband is used through emergency communications. And now we do tracking automation as well. There's about 10 slides left. Technologies evolved in overlapping years. The period overlapping became technologies really replaced one another overnight. Many mines continued to combine bell systems, leaky feeder, fiber, Wi-Fi, and newer broadband networks, accommodating the operational need. So from 1860 to 1900, they used bells, whistles, and messengers. Now, if you Google and ask when was the first leaky feeder system installed, you will see it was in 1860. Some say Ireland in the coal mine, some say in America. From 1900 to 1945, wired telephones was introduced. Overlapping 1938 to 75, through rock radio was utilized. 1970 to 1995, up till today, leaky feeder radios, band-wide communications. 95 to 2010 is digital radio. 2000 to present is fiber, underground Wi-Fi, and private LTE. Frequency determine what works underground. Higher frequencies, VHF, UHF, and microwave systems become unuseful when the mine supplies a guided path. Becomes useful when mine supplies a guided pathway, such as radiated cable access points in distributed antennas. Lower frequencies, 3 to 30 kilohertz. It's extremely good for rock penetration. Low frequency is good for it. 30 to 300 kilohertz. 300 to 3 megs is moderate. And then the normal HF 3 to 30 megs, poor underground performance. We've tried it, it did not work. We even connected the pipes, so yeah. 30 to 300 megs, it doesn't penetrate rock at all. It needed the guided system. 300 to 3 gigahertz is excellent in tunnels with leaky feeder or Wi-Fi. Microwaves, obviously, is line of sight. Early systems solved different problems. Bell telephones and through earth systems should be judged against the problems they solved. The strengths and limits explains why later mines combined multiple communication layers rather than relying on one technology. So the Bell system is reliable, simply, it's battery operated, 24 volt or 48 volts, battery operated. Magneto telephones, yeah, 70 volts to 100 volts with 50 hertz. Um, ringer, yeah, it does wake you up. It's a clear point-to-point communications. The constraint was at fixed areas where telephone is located, and the cables were fragile. Through the earth, 3 to 20 kilohertz, works through rock in emergencies. Constraints is limited bandwidth and large antennas. As I said, the antenna can up to be 30 kilos. Coverage capacity and control drive selection. Leaky feeder, Wi-Fi, and LTE are not automatically substituted for one another. A mine may use fiber to transport, leaky feeder for dependable voice, and Wi-Fi for local applications, and LTE for manageable mobility and automation. Leaky feeder best is continuous tunnel coverage. It's good for voice, paging, and modest data. 4,800 bits to 11, what's it, 11.5, 11.9, It's the best we can get on a leaky feeder cable. Wi-Fi, dense location, localized coverage. You can use tablets, VoIP, access point, and the design focus must be around your access point spacing and roaming. LTE, manage mobile coverage. Automation is the carriers, and then design focus, cost, and spectrum. Well, we wanted to install LTE in the mine. Now, the legislation is very, very strict around LTE. The big LTE, or the big mobile carriers, Vodacom, MTN, Telkom, Cell C, they pay lots of monies for their spectrum. Now, the spectrum we wanted to use was 800 to 900 megahertz, band 5. That belongs to Telkom. We approached Telkom and we said to them, this is the plan. They said to us, yeah, no problem. 4 million rand a year license fee. And we want to sell data for each device. We argued this is underground. We're not going to transmit band 5 above ground. They said it doesn't matter. That spectrum belongs to us. What happened? We dumped the whole LTE system. 5 years of R&D and a few million rand R&D with that as well. So yeah, that's why we decided not to do LTE anymore. So a connected mine starts with engineering disciplines. Firstly will be the propagation. You have to look at the model of the mine, the rock, the strata, the junctions, the steel arches, the equipment in the tunnels. You have to select your backbone. Select it either be fiber or coax or whatever. Coverage, you have to plan beforehand where you're going to place your antennas and your access points. Resilience, provide redundant power, paths for your cabling, repeaters, and failover systems. Positioning that matches the tracking accuracy to safety and operational needs. Integration, unified dispatch, SCADA, telemetry, video, GIS, and fleets. Cybersecurity. Now, a mine always, I'm 99, Oh, we forgot about cybersecurity. So from the beginning, you have to count cybersecurity in. Maintainability, design for diagnostics, repairs, access, and future exploration. When I was a technician doing leaky feeder maintenance, my tools was star screwdriver, number 2, a flat screwdriver, a large one and a small one, a 7 millimeter nut driver, a multimeter, and a ladder. That's what I had to do my maintenance with. So you have to walk a tunnel. Remember, it's 350 meters between amplifiers. So you start at the first one, it's on. You can see it's on. You check, the power is there. Then you walk that 350 meters to the next one. It's dead. Now you take your step ladder, climb on. Remember, you're not allowed to go higher than 1.8 meters. Otherwise, you have to do a risk assessment. And then you open it up, you test it, there's no power. Then you have to walk back and see where the cable is damaged. Then you have to fix it. I see Mark asks a question. Mark, yes, it does. I will explain to you a little bit later about that one. So the next network, so yeah, that's what we use now. Nowadays, it's much easier. I don't want to talk too much. You guys might see it at the electromining, but the technicians' work, it's much, much easier. The next network will be more autonomous. Connected digital mind links every worker, vehicle, sensor, and machine. With AI, network optimization and emergency response, that's for AI. Edge, real-time analysis of operations. Now, I don't want to say, no, let me know, rather not. We'll have robotics, so we will have a robot that actually drills and do inspections. We'll have drones and swarms. So if there's emergency, we'll send in a drone with a camera. We'll fly in, assess the area, come out, and we can see the video. Or at real time, if the leaky feeder or the communication system is still up, we'll be able to see that in real time. Digital twins is live. They say virtual models of underground operations. It's getting to live models. What they mean by virtual is you will see the orientation of the machine. If it's an incline, decline, it's tilt to sides. If it's drilling with a boom and so on. IoT, we will start seeing more IoT devices on the ground. Security, OT protection, and quantum resistant encryption. 6G architecture prepared for future radio standards, and precision, higher accuracy, personnel, and asset tracking. So yeah, future developments, I've already said that. Shut up, yeah. Technical references, amplifiers, and headings. Now on the slide, on the left-hand side, you'll see there's a RBDBA. It's a remote diagnostics bidirectional amplifier. So on the to the right of that, that's your unit that interrogates that amplifier, and that data is then sent to a server where a person can see what's the voltage on the leaky feeder, the RF power going out of the amplifier, RF power coming into the amplifier. if the gain is too high and if the attenuation is too high. Underneath you have splitters. I think I'll read that just now, and then on the right-hand side of it is your head-end combiner, your head-end and your head-end combiner. Your head-end is made up from a server with a screen, then a 16 to 8 to 16 channel head-end splitter, up to 16 channels of repeaters, 4 arterials. It can work on VHF, UHF, and a GSM band. On the bottom of the slide, you'll see there's power injectors. You can put power in both sides and isolate the two from each other. And then the other one is you have one power input and then it puts power on both of the arterials. And backup power supplies. Now I'm going to read the other one. Shown is typically amplifiers, head-ends and splitters, terminations, power and coupling hardware. Use the equipment manufacturer's design rules and mine-specific safety standards when selecting or installing components. Normal installation consists of 350 meters of length of cable with 23 dB losses over 350 meters. With each 350 meter, we install after 350 meters, we install an amplifier to compensate for the losses. And the gain of the amplifier is plus minus 25 dB. We then have joints in the cable. We need to take that into consideration. With a two-way splitter, we use a rule of thumb. Each split will have a 4 dB attenuation, so you have to add 100 meters on the cable. So if you have a cable that's 200 meters long and you have a crosscut, you have to put a splitter in there. Then 50 meters after that splitter, you have to install another amplifier. With a three-way splitter, we have to have 100 meters for the first split, and then the second and third split, you add 150 meters. So it's actually another 3.5 dB loss. Remember, 3 dB's loss of gain is double the power. 3 dB gain is double the power. 3 dB loss is half the power. So yeah. Normal splice box have about 1.8 dB loss. So we had to have 40 meters to the cable. At the end of the cable, we install a termination block, 50 ohm dummy load for UHF and 75 ohm dummy load for VHF and 50 for UHF. That is to balance the cable installation and to prevent dead spots. Stope antennas will be installed at the end of the cable to cover the last 50 to 80 meters. This is normally where blasting is taking place. So you don't want to put a leaky feeder cable into a face. That rock comes flying out there and damage the cable, and 14,000 Rand a roll of cable damaged. Where you can put a stope antenna that costs you in the region of 4,000, 5,000 Rand. Remember, it needs to be intrinsically safe. No aluminium, because aluminium is contraband. So yeah, that's one of the other stuff you have to work with. Oh, sorry. Then, okay, there's 2 slides left, propagation and antennas references. And then the other one, I'm at the last one, Keith. So you have to take in consideration when you plan stuff, attenuation and required coverage and so on. So communication is the nervous system of the modern underground mine. Coverage enables safety, capability enables data, integration enables optimization. Sorry, that's it. So I see there's one question. Can I answer that one quickly for him, Keith?
Please go ahead, Henry.
The question is, would the composition of the various rock in a mine, crystal, quartz, magnetite, I think it's manganese or magnetite, dolomite, iron, or not affect the frequency transmission? It does affect it. Different strata has more attenuation than others. So you'll get 30 meters from a cable, and if there's a lot of, depends on the mine itself, you might be getting only 10 meters off the cable. I hope that answers it.
Thank you for that, Henry. I see that Ray's also, Stuart is thanking you for a very informative presentation, and I agree with him. Also had no idea of the extent of what happens underground. And I see Ray is saying, are the slows in the Licky feeder coax different sizes for I'm sure that means slots. Are the slots in the Licky feeder coax different sizes for different frequencies?
I can quickly answer that. Depends on cable to cable. VHF cable is a solid core with your center isolation and 16 strands of 1 millimeter wire. That's for VHF. Now UHF and higher up, depending on the size of the cable, on half inch, the one that normally use, the slots is about 5 millimeters. Each ridge gets cut open with a grinder, so they cut the sides of the cable open, and then the bigger the cable, the bigger the slots. But I could go into that, but that's a talk for another day on coax. So you have to take in consideration the distance, your coupling losses from the cable, and the power it can run on the cable. We only allowed 500 milliwatts, not more than 500 milliwatts. Why is aluminium not allowed underground? It can cause fires. Ammonium nitrate and aluminium is not very, very nice friends. So yeah.
I see there's a few more questions coming through.
Party underground used by others. No, that spectrum belongs to the carrier. Doesn't belong to ICASA.
Yeah, I know they pay millions for those things. And I see Mark's asked a question about grounding there as well, Henry.
No, not at all. You don't want to ground your cable because the outside of the cable is negative and the inside of the cable is positive. And you don't want to have a ground loop with a normal ground. You don't want to ground your coaxial cable. There's no static buildup in that cable at all.
And I know that Ray asked that question on aluminium, and you said it can cause fires. I didn't know that, Henry. I mean, how does aluminium cause combustion?
Ammonium nitrate is the explosive they use in the mine, and it's corrosive.
Oh, okay.
It interacts with the aluminium, and it gets very hot, and it will self-ignite.
That's amazing. You've also got to be worried about chemistry. Never mind everything else.
Yeah.
Okay, let's please keep the questions coming if anybody's got more questions. I see that Ray says, thank you very much, Henry. Very interesting talk. Let me, anybody else on Zoom that has any questions, please either ask your questions now or just unmute and go ahead and ask.
See, Mark explained it there nicely. I don't know that. I just was told that was what's caused it. So yeah, it's very, very powerful explosive. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. That's very interesting. I'm just going to ask on the repeater network to see if there's anybody out there listening and may have any questions. Give me 1 second. Anybody on ZS6 STN and the interconnected repeaters? If you have a question, please ask your question now. ZS6 STN is listening. Okay, nothing heard on the repeater network there, Henry. But yeah, I see Nigel is saying fascinating or very interesting talk. Henry, I was taking some notes here out of interest, and you did answer a lot of my questions towards the end. So there's obviously it looks like the LTE network is extremely expensive, so you're not going that route under mines at the moment, and they're still using a leaky feeder cable. And the slots, I mean, it's not a slot antenna that you're using, so those slots don't have anything to do with the frequency in the cable. It's just what that's just to let the signals in and out of the cable, the coax cable. That's my reading on those slots in the cable there, Henry. Is that right?
Yeah, what it does, it actually leaks out of the cable. So in the beginning, they used normal TV coax because of the braid that was not very tightly meshed. And that's how they found out that if they cut the cable open on the sides, the RF actually leaks out of the cable. That's where your coupling losses come from. So
Right.
you have a 50% coupling loss and a 95 coupling loss over 2 meters. And that gives you the amount of energy coming from the cable. A 50% coupling loss is about 70 dB, and 95 loss is here close to 90 dB attenuation. So there's a lot of maths that the guys do there. So yeah.
Oh, no, that's significant. And I know you've just recently published an article in Radio ZS, I think, Henry, as well. So that we will publish this presentation for all to have a look at as well, if all those interested. And there's a nice, interesting article in Radio ZS. I didn't realize that you had major fleets running underground. Well, put it this way, I knew that you had these trolleys running up and down and trucks and things like that. But I think all the stories we see are of the old mines with those, what do they call those little goodies? Not the big trucks that your pictures had. I wasn't even aware of that. And then how did you achieve 50 to 80 meters out of your access points? I can't even get my Wi-Fi from my router to travel through a wall of my house, Henry. How did you achieve that?
If that is IP, I can't explain.
Okay.
We are busy with a system now where we get um, a kilometer. So a
Wow.
kilometer Wi-Fi. In Germany, we've got it in a salt mine. We're sitting at 960 meters, and we get 1 megabits per second over that distance.
That is absolutely amazing. There's a couple of texts we can learn from that thing. Do they use cell phones underground, Henry? I was wondering about obviously the fire risk, ignition risk, but obviously you mentioned Wi-Fi. Do they use cell phones underground or not?
Yes, specifically made for the mines. They call it a rugged phone, and there's very, very strict legislation that goes around it. So, yeah.
Okay. I see Ray's asked a question. Doesn't the tunnel act like a focus or an amplifier directing the signal, I'm assuming?
There's one slide that I would quickly go to, um, slide number 33. Um, a tunnel or a mine acts like a waveguide. So the frequencies, the test that we done actually a long time ago, found that VHF was the cheapest to run and UHF was a better frequency to utilize. But nowadays, we see 800 megs and 2.4 gigahertz inside the tunnel, depending on the size of the tunnel, um, gives you better propagation. So that comes down to one of the distances we get 80 to 100 meters of access point. It's because of the tunnel form a waveguide, and a small secret, we use circular antennas, right? Circular polarized antennas.
Okay, I thought circularly polarized antennas were kind of omnidirectional, but your image is showing it's more got gain on one side there, Henry.
Um, Somebody else is phoning me now.
Okay.
In a meeting, call back later. Um, you'll see on that presentation on slide 33 is a helical antenna. That's a circularized antenna.
Circularly
We
polarized.
use left-handed.
Okay. Okay. And then I thought my son would be very interested in having your access to one of your access points because you had a lovely low latency on your lines for gaming. But that was just me because my son always used to complain
No,
about the latency of
for
Wi-Fi.
gaming, use copper. Don't use Wi-Fi. Connect it to your router directly. Copper is much better than Wi-Fi.
I get you. And then drones underground. That is absolutely amazing. Are these autonomous or are they controlled drones through first person flying these drones underground, Henry?
Um, what we ganged up with a company that fly drones. So what they'll do is they put a LiDAR system on the drone and they will fly it in the tunnel. So it will learn itself with AI to avoid the roof wall, the side walls, any obstruction. So it will fly autonomous.
Wow. Wow. Okay. That's amazing. I didn't even know that drones had gone underground. And then one of my other notes was obviously you got no GPS tracking underground, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
But you mentioned like 30 centimeter resolution on knowing where a person or a vehicle or something is. That is also absolutely amazing. That's
Yeah.
in
What
terms
we
of
do is we have beacons on the wall at certain intervals with an
yeah.
ID, ultra wideband transmitters and receivers. So if somebody walks past it, we know exactly where they are with ultra wideband.
Yeah.
So
Henriette, you've got a major city monitoring network sitting underground there with the fleet monitoring and
you have to.
where everything is. It is absolutely amazing. Okay, I see. I know we're way over time. We're just going on for 17 minutes past 8. Let's take a last round if anybody's got any questions. If you don't know how to put up your hand or use the chat, just unmute and ask your question. Last round before we close out on the Power Hour Tech Talk. Okay, no questions. Henry, then I'd like to say a very, very big thank you. I know that I twisted your arm a little bit, but you put together a extremely interesting presentation on underground communications and the evolution of underground communications. And I'd like to say a very big thank you for the time and effort that has gone into preparing for this presentation, as well as for your time this evening. I know that this is your work, so we're encroaching on that a little bit, but I have certainly learned a lot from this evening's presentation. Then I'd just like to let everybody know that we have our Tech Talk on the last Wednesday of every month. So watch out for the Power Hour Tech Talk in August, and we will advertise that one shortly. Thank you very much, Henry, and thank you to everybody who joined us this evening. And I think that's a wrap. So good night, everyone, and 7-3.